So kind of really early on in the kind of transition out of the tech, I grew up in the ad space in advertising and publishing. And then from there I went into the tech space. I was recruited by Microsoft prior to the development of .NET and web services, and worked on developer community at Microsoft, and then developer and designer community at Adobe for many years, the back out with the ad agency community at Yahoo for a short stint. Done quite a few startups, Hootsuite probably being the biggest of that. And when I looked at agile development and what was happening in the changing world of developing, I started early on to apply those same agile principles to marketing. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is, why I've learned to use stuff and know the stuff I'm using, and then always be selling, always be sharing and measuring the right things. And the implementation of these ideas as an agile marketing framework was something that we called More Awesome at Hootsuite. And you have two options really: you can suck less or you can be more awesome. And being more awesome isn't about being more awesome than somebody else, although I guess that's a great benefit if that happens to you from a startup perspective. What it's really about is being more awesome than you were yesterday, and being more awesome as a team than you were last week, as a company than you were last month, whatever your reporting periods are. And to be able to really narrow down your focus onto the incremental shifts that you're making in each of these categories in terms of user adoption, user acquisition, conversion, renewal, whatever the levers are within your business. I'm always looking for that kind of what's the minor shift. And I'll give you an example, even in the current startup. So we put some new products in stealth mode into a test in one of the e-commerce marketplaces that we're looking at. And what I saw from the new products was, after only 20 people had looked at stuff, we already had 8 favorited, versus when we were doing in the past, we were getting about kind of 4 to 6. So that tells me that we're going in the right direction. And I'm a big fan of doing things kind of one at a time, and getting to customers one at a time, and getting those customers converted and finding out who they are and talking to them, very similar to Gary Vaynerchuk or other people in the space who kind of look at it the same way. So the first is, I believe you have to be a user of the product. I've talked to so many startup people and so many marketing people that have a great pitch and a great idea and a great story, but I don't see any real example of them actually using the product. If many cases, maybe your business model doesn't allow for you to use the product, but if you can have a good story about how you use it, why you use it, and your success in using it, I've found that to be one of the most credible stories I can tell. Hootsuite was an example of that. Of course, we ran 40 plus social channels with over 200 people involved in the creation of the content across those, using the actual tool Hootsuite. And as a marketing professional working on top of that platform, I was able to be credible, talking about how to use it and helping other marketers figure out a way to use it. Vice versa, when I worked at Microsoft, I didn't really like Microsoft Word, so I never talked about it, nor did I talk to other people about why they should be using it. So this is, leads to your creative director probably having problems with the code, but you'll get used to that. The second is, and I heard some great examples of this tonight, you're always testing for demand. You're always looking to validate and the model that you're going to market with. And as you're rolling out new features and rolling out new products or rolling out new partnerships, you really want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, that you're focused on the right thing, that you're focused on the things that the market believes you should be focused on, what your customers are doing, etc. And this is really a great opportunity for marketing, if you've got a good discipline around data and around agile development, to be able to optimize your plans, to be involved in validation of those models. And I'll give you an example. In one case, we looked at a very complex product suite being built on top of one of the platforms I was working on. And rather than prototype and alpha that, et cetera, we simply had an illustrator render what it was going to look like, wrote a quick story about it, put that out on our blog, took the leads and interest from that, passed it through to sales, and had collaborative discussions with those potential partners and customers for what later became, a 7-figure product within 12 months of development. But in a very complex sales situation, we had validated it on the back of a Photoshop file. And I'm not talking about verification. Are you building the product right? This is more about validation. Am I building the right product? And I hear those two things being flipped around, but I like to keep them clean. The next is understand your customer. So I need to make one change here to my layout. Oops. All right. Sorry. I learned early on that working in marketing was really interesting for me, and that's where we thought all the fun and creative stuff that I grew up in the agency space was actually happening. But the reality was, if you're working in software or in technology, you're actually working in sales. It's up to you, the marketer, to understand the customer, understand the sales process, understand the onboarding process, understand the lead capacity for inbound sales and what they can take on. And it is your job to fill the top of the funnel, but it has to be based on real conversions. And I've seen some of our most successful campaigns in terms of number of leads drive the least amount of sales. And on the other end of that spectrum, I've seen campaigns that drove very few leads convert some of the highest sales ever. And you know, so there's no real kind of rhyme or reason to that. But if you as marketers don't participate in the whole process through to the end, through to the customer success, and be an advocate for the customer experience that will drive those conversions, and ultimately do that at the behest of sales, then you're ultimately a cost center within the organization that you're working for. And many marketers I talk to describe this fictional, magical unicorn type funnel that you see in front of you as being how sales work and how business works. And if I can fill the top of the funnel, that's going to fill a smaller portion though to the middle of the funnel. And ultimately that's going to have sales and pipeline impact. If that happens, I guess that's interesting. There's no causality between any of those three stages, nor is that really a viable model to build a business on the back of, because the reality is this is what the market looks like. This is what customers are doing. They're talking to other customers. They're on your blog, they're on your Instagram, they're on your Facebook. They're making a phone call to you. They're pretending they have a support question to see whether you suck at that or not. They're talking to your slightly impaired sales rep at a trade show event. Whatever it is, there are so many touch points that are happening. If you as a marketer can ultimately map out those touch points and make sure that you're having the right conversation at each stage, and you're having the conversation in a consistent and trustworthy fashion, it's going to be much more impactful to the bottom line than trying to do the upside down triangle magic thing. The next is find your ninjas. And I love that a couple of the business models here tonight were about doing things like apprenticeship or finding the influencers within a specific crowd and getting them engaged with brands, or even building offline communities in order to be able to do that. Every one of my successes, Microsoft Hootsuite, Adobe, Yahoo, etc., all came from building out great communities, being directly involved in those communities, finding the great developers, the right ambassadors, the ninjas who could use our products better than we could, and the detractors, the people who hated our guts, and having the real conversations with them, and enabling them to be part of our business, part of our strategy for product, and to incent them and reward them and equip them or even fund them to do anything from throwing parties to getting more people involved at their companies using actual products. And there's a ton of products out there that can help you do that kind of thing, but the reality is it's got to be built into your culture. You need to want to be able to do it. A lot of people talk about it, but having a real and significant community effort is a massive investment. It's a hard thing to maintain. It's a hard thing to justify to a board of directors or to a sales team sometimes, but it's been fundamental to my success. So I believe it's something that's worth fighting for. And finally, and I talked about this in the beginning, from an agile period of, or an agile point of view, this is about defining what your business levers are. Everybody's going to pick acquisition, conversion, retention, or acquisition, conversion, renewal. But those are probably too broad and too generic. So what I'm looking for is web conversion to freemium, or I'm looking for renewal at 90 days. Those very specific small levers that are going to make a difference to your business correlate or find the causality between your activity and your behavior and how you're impacting those numbers, and motivate and drive your teams or people or your own behavior on a week over week basis based on improving or modifying or understanding those fractional improvements that you're making. Because the big picture number, 3 million users, potential market size, 100,000 people currently have accounts on the system, etc. Those are all really irrelevant. What matters is how many people are logging in today, using the product today, and how many people are going to renew at the end of the 30-day payment period. And it is, it's up to you to understand how your behavior is specifically impacting those actual activities. So this is a typical marketing chart for me, where I'm simply looking at variance in overall sales or lead attainment or lead conversion in this case. So when marketing hands something off to sales, how many times did we produce that event? And how do our weeks look week over week based on our activity? And in this case, you could look at that and say, wow, you guys really sucked for the first 4 weeks. That was Christmas. And then we came out, kind of in January, doing things much differently. So there's very real things that are happening that are going to have a direct impact on those. And then it's up to you to determine what your impact can be on those specific levers. So yeah, I'm going to just reiterate all of that. I knew from the beginning I had to use the product. I'm that kind of person anyway. I'm hands-on user experience designer and designer. I need to know how something works if you want me to talk about it. And I had to believe that there was a need for that product that fit the price tag that was being offered so that I could be credible writing messaging about it, inspiring teams of content creators to build content for it, and ultimately being able to answer to sales who I worked for in terms of where I thought we were going to be successful, where we were going to have difficulty, what it was we were going to really and truly be able to do. The other really important lesson I learned around community is that all my great partners were actually developers. Business partnerships are Barneys, what we used to call Barneys. I don't know if you guys use that word anymore. I'm not Gen Z. So, but Barneys are the useless neighbor that Fred had. Why is Fred Flintstone friends with Barney? It doesn't really matter. He's his neighbor, I guess. So we used to use Barney to describe those, hey, we should do a collab or we should do a partnership or whatever it was. It was driven around kind of business value. Really, it's two people trying to steal sales off each other or co-opt a percentage of each other's margin. What really mattered at the end of the day was if people could build on my platform, if my API was useful, secure, and usable and affordable. And secondly, if what they were going to bring to market was actually a value add and not just competing for the same dollar I was inside the same customer. And my go-to-market, or what I like to call get-to-market strategy when you're in the early stage, just get to market, was to get users and customers to tell my story. All the big organizations I've worked for suck at user referral and customer referral and getting customer stories. And as a result of that, they have to build whole elaborate teams and incentive programs and stuff around it to get those use cases and stories out there. But if you can find out what people really want and find your true evangelist, and make sure that early on in the sales process, you're right to use their name, tell their story, use their brand, and even to have them participate without your involvement in the telling of those stories about how great your products are. That's ultimately going to make a much bigger difference. So I'm anywhere on social, I'm at Bitpacket, and you can pick any domain and put Bitpacket at, and I'll get your email. I do some analyst work around go-to-market, mostly through the analyst firms like Gartner and Forrester, but I also do some one-on-one with startups, primarily we're at the going to get revenue stage is where I'm usually specifically focused in that category. But currently around 2/3 of my time is taken up with my own startup. So.
Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate that. And I actually had a question that was one of the audience members brought up. So I'm going to try to rephrase a bit what David said. At the very early stages, like we've had a lot of early stage founders pitch tonight, and there's some in the audience. Time and resources are always limited. And so what about spending time building community, of followers organically, commenting, discussing? I think one of the founders talked about that, going to meet them where they are, speaking at events, versus the paid ads route. I mean, what proportion of your time and resources would you put to each when you're early stage?
Yeah, so early stage, I would say your paid ad budget is $5 a day. And if it's more than that, I'm not sure how you're getting to all those people. Because if you're trying to drive likes on your Facebook page or on your LinkedIn profile or get followers on Instagram or whatever, I'm not sure how you're converting that into revenue. If you can spend $5 a day on a deep micro-targeted audience on the paid side, that's going to get you who knows, 12 people, 15 people, that's still a lot of people for you to get out there and talk to. And if you're not getting out there and talking to them, it doesn't make sense that you're doing this. So, and on the flip side, I would say that is your, to some degree tied into the same thing as your community investment. You're doing this, from my perspective, I'm doing this, we're doing this one person at a time, and we're bringing those people onto our platform and into our world one person at a time, or we're getting their feedback about why they don't want to participate, or why they don't want to participate today, or when they want to participate. This is ultimately driven out of, we don't need more Barneys. We don't need friends. We don't need more handshakes. Sure, it's great to meet lots of cool people who potentially like the idea of your product, but that's not ultimately going to have a great impact on your bottom line. This is about getting to actual people and getting to actual users. And I personally love the way Nito started with that premise in terms of telling his story.
Thanks, Ben. And just to follow up, since you mentioned Facebook, is there any particular reason, what about LinkedIn, Twitter? Are those as effective?
Insert platform here, whether you're buying shout outs or props from a TikTok user, or you're spending $5 a day on Facebook or LinkedIn. I think of LinkedIn as a great way to do content marketing, where you've got something with a reg wall. So I'm going to drive some kind of story, and then from the story is going to give you access to something of value, a report, a research, a free analysis, or a consultation, or something like that. This is about getting that kind of first stage engagement in the sales process. So I think LinkedIn's great for that. What I think Facebook's for is if you're going after a community of interest. They've got the biggest audience in terms of being able to micro segment on interest. And by the way, the more you micro segment, the more interest you can add to that tagline, the smaller your segmentation becomes, and the more tighter it becomes, the more effective it's going to be. Twitter, again, for conversion. So I like the cards approach, or whatever variation of that you're going to use now that product's not really an official approach. But it is about gaining interest and lead. And then of course on Instagram, you're stuck in the world of kind of likes, etc. Now I'm going to preface all of that with what I'm really trying to do is get into a direct message conversation on every one of those platforms.
I didn't want to monopolize this, so if any of the panelists have any questions, it's not just for me. I've kind of, there don't seem to be any others in the Q&A, so feel free to jump in if you had one, because I have more actually. But okay, so there isn't. I'm going to ask my question then. And by the way, I just see Jessica's joined us back, so I think the judges have deliberated. So let's keep this quick, Ben, because I know a lot of people are waiting for the winners. It was just a generic question, since you've been at startups that have scaled from very small, Hootsuite, to very big. When you're just two co-founders, let's say, or maybe three, and you're a team of 5 or 6, like all of them tonight, there's no kind of marketing department. And you did say a good point. As a founder, you're always selling. But is there any specific advice you'd give at that stage, just to end it on a big note?
So if you're not, if you don't have a good understanding of how to go after marketing, I don't know how to help you other than really hiring somebody who does. It felt like the startups here tonight all had a good handle on what that meant in terms of going after the market. My first piece of advice would be never shortchange yourself on the development of content or graphics or branding materials. It's going to have a huge impact down the road in how people perceive the professionalism of your company. And by the way, if your brand is a Courier font always at 18 points, that's totally cool. That's your brand. There's no right or wrong in that, but it's making sure that it's done properly and done consistently. And especially when you're small, you've got very few impressions and opportunities to kind of get out in front of people. So you want to make those things count. And the next thing is get the fluff and the hyperbole and all that shit out of your story. Nobody cares about it, right? You will be able to do this by doing this, by spending this, because it will solve this problem. Those very simple statements are gold. What's not gold is we're the best, we're the biggest, we're replaced, we like all that kind of stuff. Nobody cares about that. Nobody's going to believe you saying it anyway.